Long reach. Long reach is one of the most obvious and most valuable physical advantages in striking because it allows you to hit your opponent from distances where they can't hit you back. When your arms are longer, you control range, dictate the pace of exchanges, and force your opponent to close a gap that puts them in danger while you stay safe on the outside. The fundamental advantage is simple. If your jab reaches 6 inches further than your opponent's, you can land clean shots while staying outside their punching range. This forces them to move forward constantly, expend energy closing distance, and take risks just to get into a position where they can land anything. Meanwhile, you're picking them apart from the outside, landing at will and retreating before they can counter. Defensively, long reach also makes it easier to keep opponents at bay with the jab, teep kicks, and long straight punches. You're creating a barrier that they have to navigate through, and every time they try to enter, you can touch them and disrupt their rhythm before they get close enough to be dangerous. John Jones is the perfect example of how reach can define an entire career. Standing 6 feet 4 with an 84.5-inch wingspan, Jones used his reach to completely neutralize opponents in the light heavyweight division. His jab, his teep kicks, and his ability to strike from distances where opponents couldn't reach him made him one of the most dominant champions in UFC history. Opponents knew what he was doing, but his physical tools made it almost impossible to solve. Israel Adesanya built his entire striking system around reach and distance control. His 80-inch reach at middleweight gave him a significant length advantage over most of his opponents, and he used it to stay on the outside, land clean shots, and avoid getting hit. His striking looked effortless not just because of his technique, but because his reach allowed him to operate in a range where most middleweights couldn't threaten him. Big hands. Big hands in striking provide the same advantage they do in grappling. More mass behind each strike. When you throw a punch, you're creating a kinetic chain that transfers force from your legs through your hips, torso, and shoulders, and finally into your fist. A heavier fist at the end of that chain means more momentum, and since force equals mass times acceleration, that extra weight delivers significantly more impact energy into your opponent's skull. The physics is straightforward. The heavier the object moving at speed, the harder it hits. Two fighters with identical technique, speed, and power generation will not hit with the same force if one has significantly larger hands. The fighter with bigger hands is swinging more mass, and that mass translates directly into knockout power. This advantage is most obvious in one-punch knockout situations. When someone gets caught clean and goes unconscious immediately, it's often because the strike carried enough force to rattle their brain violently inside their skull. Bigger hands make that outcome more likely because every punch carries more weight behind it, even when the technique isn't perfect. Francis Ngannou might be the most extreme example of this advantage in combat sports history. His hands are genuinely oversized, and combined with his explosive power, they turn into wrecking balls. When Ngannou knocked out Alistair Overeem with an uppercut or deleted Jairzinho Rozenstruik in 20 seconds, those massive fists were a huge factor. The sheer weight behind his punches made even glancing blows dangerous, and clean shots were often fight-ending. Deontay Wilder in boxing built his entire career on big hands and knockout power. His right hand became legendary because when it landed clean, opponents went down, and a significant part of that power came from the mass of his fist. Wilder's technique was often criticized, but his physical tools made up for it because the hand itself was a weapon. Fast twitch muscle fibers. Fast twitch muscle fibers are responsible for explosive, high-speed movements, and in striking that translates directly to hand speed, combination speed, and the ability to land strikes before your opponent can react or defend. The faster your punches, the less time your opponent has to see them coming, slip them, or counter, and in a sport where milliseconds matter, fast twitch dominance is a massive advantage. Hand speed allows you to land clean shots in openings that only exist for a split second. When your opponent drops their guard, blinks, or shifts their weight, there's a tiny window where they're vulnerable. A fast twitch dominant striker can explode into that window and land before it closes. A slower striker sees the same opening but can't capitalize because by the time their punch arrives, the opponent has already recovered. Combination speed works the same way. Throwing fast, fluid combinations keeps your opponent defensive and prevents them from countering between your strikes. If your hands are slow, your opponent can slip the first punch and counter before your second punch arrives. If your hands are fast, they're defending the whole sequence and can't find space to hit back. Fast twitch fibers also create knockout power through speed. Power isn't just about mass, it's about acceleration. A lighter punch thrown with extreme speed can generate as much or more force than a heavier punch thrown slowly because kinetic energy increases with the square of velocity. Fast twitch strikers generate devastating power, not just from their strength, but from how quickly their fists accelerate. Roy Jones Jr. in his prime was one of the fastest strikers in boxing history, and his speed made him nearly impossible to hit while allowing him to land at will. His reflexes and hand speed came directly from fast twitch muscle dominance, and opponents who were technically sound still couldn't deal with how fast he moved. Conor McGregor built his early UFC career on fast twitch explosiveness. His left hand was lightning fast and carried fight-ending power, a combination that comes directly from explosive muscle fiber recruitment. He could close distance, land clean, and finish fights in moments where slower strikers would still be setting up their offense. Thick neck. A thick, muscular muscular neck is one of the most important physical attributes for absorbing punches and staying conscious in striking. When you get punched in the head, your skull wants to snap backward or sideways, and that whiplash motion is what causes your brain to bounce around inside your skull, leading to knockouts. A thick neck acts like a natural shock absorber, stabilizing your head and reducing that violent rotational force. The mechanics are simple. When a punch lands on your head, the force tries to rotate your skull rapidly. Your neck muscles resist that rotation, and the stronger and thicker those muscles are, the more resistance they provide. This keeps your head more stable and your brain less rattled, which means you can take bigger shots without losing consciousness or losing your legs. Fighters with thin necks are significantly more vulnerable to knockouts because their head moves more freely when struck. The lack of muscular stabilization means their brain experiences more violent acceleration and deceleration, and that's what causes the lights to go out. Thick-necked fighters can eat the same punch and stay standing because their neck absorbs and dissipates the rotational energy before it fully transfers to their brain. This advantage doesn't make you immune to knockouts, but it raises the threshold significantly. You can take cleaner, harder shots and remain conscious and functional, which gives you more margin for error in exchanges and allows you to fight through moments that would finish other fighters. Mark Hunt, one of the most durable heavyweights in MMA and kickboxing history, had a famously thick neck and an iron chin. Throughout his career, he absorbed massive shots from elite strikers like Alistair Overeem, Junior Dos Santos, and Stipe Miocic, and while he took damage, he stayed conscious and dangerous. His neck was a huge part of why he could walk through punches that would have knocked out most fighters. Yoel Romero's neck is legendarily thick, looking more like a tree trunk than a human body part. Throughout his UFC career, he absorbed clean shots from elite strikers like Robert Whittaker, Paulo Costa, and Israel Adesanya, and while those punches landed, they didn't put him down. His neck allowed him to stay in fights where thinner-necked fighters would have been finished. Wide shoulders. Wide shoulders provide a structural advantage in striking that directly affects punching power, particularly on hooks and crosses. When you throw a punch, power is generated through a kinetic chain that starts in your legs, moves through your hips, transfers up your torso, and finally explodes out through your shoulder and arm. Wider shoulders create a longer lever at the final stage of that chain, which increases the rotational force and the speed at which your fist travels. The physics is straightforward. A longer lever moving at the same rotational speed covers more distance, which means higher velocity at the point of impact. When you throw a hook, your shoulder acts as the pivot point, and the wider your shoulders, the further your fist has to travel in the same amount of time, which increases its speed and the force it delivers when it lands. Hooks and overhands benefit the most from wide shoulders because those punches rely heavily on shoulder rotation and torque. A fighter with narrow shoulders throwing a hook is generating power from a shorter lever, which limits how much speed and force they can create. A fighter with wide shoulders throwing the same punch is swinging a longer, heavier lever, and the result is a significantly more powerful strike. Wide shoulders also improve your ability to generate power from awkward angles. In close range exchanges or when you're off balance, narrow-shouldered fighters lose a lot of their power because they can't fully rotate their torso. Wide-shouldered fighters can still generate force through shoulder rotation alone, which makes them dangerous even in positions where their technique isn't perfect. Anthony Joshua's wide, powerful shoulders are a big part of what makes his right hand so devastating. His uppercuts and hooks carry knockout power because his shoulder width gives him the leverage to generate massive force even when he's not perfectly set. When he caught Vladimir Klitschko with that uppercut in their first fight, his shoulder structure was a huge factor in the power behind that shot. Canelo Alvarez has exceptionally wide shoulders for his height, and his hooks are some of the most feared punches in boxing. His body shots and head hooks carry fight-ending power because his shoulder width allows him to generate rotational force that fighters with narrower frames simply can't match. Long legs. Long legs in striking provide the same fundamental advantage as long arms, more reach, more leverage, and the ability to attack from distances where your opponent can't effectively counter. In kickboxing and MMA, leg length determines your kicking range, and the longer your legs, the further you can keep opponents away while landing damaging strikes. The most obvious advantage is kicking range. A fighter with long legs can throw low kicks, body kicks, and head kicks from distances where shorter-legged opponents can't reach them with their own kicks. This forces the shorter fighter to close distance constantly, expend energy moving forward, and take risks just to get into a range where they can be effective. Meanwhile, the long-legged fighter is landing kicks at will and controlling the pace of the fight. Power generation in kicks also benefits from leg length. When you throw a roundhouse kick, power comes from hip rotation and the speed at which your shin or foot travels through the arc of the kick. A longer leg covers more distance in the same rotational movement, which means higher velocity at the point of impact. The physics is the same as with punching. A longer lever moving at speed generates more force. Leg kicks become especially dangerous with long legs because the shin is traveling faster and covering more ground, which means more impact force on your opponent's thigh or calf. Repeated leg kicks from a long-legged fighter accumulate damage quickly and can compromise an opponent's mobility and ability to generate power in their own strikes. kicks. John Jones used his long legs to dominate opponents with oblique kicks, teep kicks, and leg kicks that kept them at distances where they couldn't threaten him. His leg length gave him the ability to attack without being attacked, and even when opponents knew what he was doing, they couldn't close the distance without taking damage. Alex Pereira's long legs are a massive part of what makes him such a devastating striker. His low kicks carry exceptional power because of the length and leverage behind them, and throughout his kickboxing career and UFC run, he's chopped down opponents like Israel Adesanya and Jan Blachowicz with brutal leg kicks that compromised their movement and set up his knockouts. Strong core. A strong core is the foundation of punching power and defensive stability in striking. Your core connects your lower body to your upper body, and every powerful punch you throw requires your core to transfer force from your legs and hips up through your torso and into your shoulders and arms. If your core is weak, that transfer is inefficient and you lose power. If your core is strong, the transfer is clean and explosive, and your punches carry maximum force. When you throw a cross or a hook, the power starts in your legs, moves through your hips as they rotate, and then travels up your torso. Your core muscles, specifically your obliques and abdominals, are what allow that rotational force to transfer efficiently without leaking energy. A weak core means your torso twists slowly and loses power in the transition. A strong core means your torso snaps through the rotation fast and violently, multiplying the force behind your punch. Body kick defense also depends heavily on core strength. When you check a body kick or absorb one on your arms or ribs, your core is what keeps you stable and prevents the impact from folding you or knocking you off balance. A weak core means body kicks hurt more and disrupt your posture, making it harder to stay in the fight. A strong core absorbs the impact and keeps you upright and functional. Core endurance matters just as much as core strength. In long fights, your core is constantly engaged, keeping you balanced, stabilizing your movement, and generating power in every strike. If your core fatigues, your punches weaken, your defense deteriorates, and you become easier to hit and hurt. Canelo Alvarez is known for his devastating body punching, and his core strength is a huge part of what makes those shots so damaging. His ability to rotate his torso explosively and transfer power from his hips into his hooks and uppercuts comes directly from years of core conditioning, and opponents who take his body shots often visibly wilt because of how much force he generates. Tyson Fury, despite his size, has exceptional core strength that allows him to generate surprising power from awkward angles and maintain his balance even when he's off rhythm. His ability to stay upright and functional after taking big shots is partly due to his core stability, which keeps him from getting knocked off his feet. Bone density. Bone density refers to how much mineral content is packed into your bones, making them thicker, heavier, and more durable. In striking, higher bone density provides two key advantages. First, durability. Denser. Bones are significantly harder to break and can absorb more impact without fracturing, which means you can check kicks and throw punches without suffering the skeletal damage that would sideline other fighters. Second, denser bones add mass to your strikes, and more mass equals more force on impact. When you throw a punch or a kick, you're swinging bone covered in muscle and tissue at your opponent, and the heavier those bones, the more impact force the strike carries. It's the same principle as big hands. A punch thrown with dense, heavy bones hits harder than the same punch thrown with lighter bones, even if the speed and technique are identical. Checking leg kicks is where bone density becomes a serious defensive advantage. When you check a kick, you're blocking your opponent's shin with your shin, and whichever bone is denser and stronger is going to come out of that collision in better shape. Fighters with low bone density are at risk of fractures or breaks when checking hard. Kicks. Fighters with high bone density can check kicks repeatedly without worrying about their leg snapping. Throwing kicks also benefits from dense bones because your shin is essentially a weapon, and the heavier and harder that weapon is, the more damage it does on impact. A heavy shin bone crashing into an opponent's thigh or ribs delivers more force and causes more tissue damage than a lighter shin moving at the same speed. Alex Pereira's bone density is another huge part of what makes him so devastating. Those heavy bones in his shins and forearms add mass behind every strike, and combined with his technique and power, Pereira's bone density makes his kicks and punches carry a weight that's difficult for opponents to withstand. It's one reason he's been able to knock out elite competition so consistently throughout his kickboxing career and his UFC run. Edson Barboza is famous for his brutal leg kicks, and his bone density contributes significantly to how much damage those kicks cause. When Barboza lands a clean leg kick, opponents often visibly hurt or limp afterward because the density of his shin delivers impact that lighter-boned fighters can't replicate. Short, compact build. A short, compact build in striking creates advantages that aren't immediately obvious but become extremely effective in close-range exchanges and defensive situations. When your body is compact, your center of gravity is lower, your head is a smaller and harder target to hit cleanly, and your ability to generate explosive power in short bursts is enhanced because you don't have as much body mass to move. Head movement becomes significantly easier with a compact build. Slipping punches, rolling under hooks, and ducking shots all require you to move your head quickly through small spaces, and the shorter and more compact you are, the less distance your your head has to travel to get out of the way. Taller fighters with longer torsos have to move further to achieve the same defensive result, which makes them slower and easier to time. Fighting in the pocket also favors compact fighters because they can stay low, get inside their opponent's reach, and land power shots from angles where taller fighters can't effectively counter. A compact fighter can slip a jab, step inside, and unload hooks and uppercuts before their taller opponent can adjust. The taller fighter has to reset and create distance, but the compact fighter is already in their face, applying pressure. Explosiveness benefits from a compact build because there's less body to accelerate. When you throw a punch, you're moving your entire body mass through space, and the less mass you have, the faster you can move. Compact fighters tend to be more explosive in short bursts, which makes them dangerous in exchanges where speed and timing matter more than reach. Mike Tyson is the perfect example of how a short, compact build can dominate in striking. Standing 5'10" in a heavyweight division filled with fighters 6'3" and taller, Tyson used his compact frame to slip punches, get inside, and unleash devastating hooks and uppercuts. His head movement was exceptional because he didn't have far to move, and once he closed distance, his explosiveness and power made him one of the most feared fighters in boxing history. Henry Cejudo used his compact build to great effect in MMA, particularly in his striking exchanges against taller opponents like T.J. Dillashaw and Dominic Cruz. His ability to stay low, slip shots, and counter with power made him extremely difficult to hit cleanly, and his compact frame allowed him to generate knockout power even at flyweight and bantamweight. Heavy hips. Heavy hips are the engine of punching power. Almost all knockout power in striking originates from hip rotation, and the heavier and stronger your hips, the more rotational force you can generate when you throw a punch. Your hips are where your lower body and upper body connect, and when you rotate them explosively, that rotational energy transfers up through your core and into your shoulders and arms, multiplying the force behind your strike. The mechanics are simple. When you throw a cross, your rear hip rotates forward violently, and that rotation is what drives the punch. If your hips are light or weak, the rotation is slow and generates less force. If your hips are heavy and powerful, the rotation is fast and explosive, and the punch carries significantly more impact energy. Heavy hips also provide stability and balance, which allows you to stay grounded and generate power even when you're off balance or moving. Fighters with light hips tend to get pushed around more easily and lose their base during exchanges. Fighters with heavy hips stay planted, absorb pressure better, and can still generate power even in awkward positions. This advantage is especially obvious in shorter, stockier fighters who carry a lot of their body mass in their lower body. Their hips are naturally heavier, which gives them a built-in advantage when it comes to rotational power and knockout ability. George Foreman had exceptionally heavy hips and legs, and his punching power was legendary because of it. When he threw his right hand, the rotation came from hips that carried enormous mass, and that mass translated into punches that could end fights with a single shot. His knockouts of Joe Frazier and Michael Moore showed just how devastating that hip-driven power could be. Canelo Alvarez's lower body strength and hip rotation are a huge part of what makes him such a dangerous puncher. His hooks and uppercuts carry knockout power because his hips drive the rotation with explosive force, and opponents who underestimate his power often pay for it. Strong legs. Strong legs are the foundation of punching power, even though most people don't think about legs when they think about striking. Every powerful punch starts in your legs, not your arms. When you throw a cross or a hook, the force is generated by pushing off your back leg, rotating your hips, and transferring that energy up through your torso and into your fist. If your legs are weak, the entire kinetic chain falls apart, and your punches carry no real power. The mechanics are clear. When you throw a right cross as an orthodox fighter, you push off your back right leg, which drives your hip forward and starts the rotation. That push-off is what initiates the entire punching sequence, and the stronger your legs, the more force you can generate in that initial push. Weak legs mean a slow, weak push-off, which means a slow, weak punch. Leg strength also determines your ability to stay mobile and maintain your stance under pressure. If your legs are tired or weak, your footwork deteriorates, you become easier to hit, and you lose the ability to generate power because you can't push off effectively anymore. Strong legs allow you to stay light on your feet, move in and out of range, and continue generating knockout power even deep into a fight. Knockout power in the late rounds often comes down to who still has their legs under them. Fighters with weak legs fade hard in the championship rounds and lose their pop. Fighters with strong legs can still explode and finish fights when their opponent is exhausted. Deontay Wilder's knockout power came as much from his legs as from his arms. His ability to push off explosively and drive his hip through his right hand was what made that punch so devastating, and his leg strength allowed him to generate that power consistently, even into the later rounds of fights. Manny Pacquiao's explosive punching power, despite his relatively small size, size came largely from his leg strength and his ability to push off and rotate his hips with incredible speed and force. His legs were what allowed him to generate knockout power against much larger opponents throughout his career. Slow twitch muscle fibers. Slow twitch muscle fibers are built for endurance rather than explosive speed. They contract more slowly but can sustain activity for much longer periods without fatiguing, and in striking, a higher proportion of slow twitch fibers means you can maintain your pace, throw volume, and keep pressuring your opponent deep into fights when others are gassing out. The advantage is straightforward. Striking is exhausting, and as fights progress, most fighters slow down. Their output drops, their movement becomes sluggish, and they can't generate the same power or speed they had in the early rounds. Slow twitch dominant fighters don't fade the same way. Their cardio stays strong into the championship rounds. Their output remains high, and they can drown opponents in volume and relentless pace. This is the exact opposite of fast twitch dominance. You sacrifice some explosive speed and one-punch knockout power, but you gain the ability to break opponents mentally and physically by never stopping. You can throw 100 punches a round and do it for 5 rounds, and your opponent, even if they're more explosive, can't match that pace. Slow twitch dominance also allows for high-volume combinations and constant pressure. You're not looking for the perfect shot to land. You're overwhelming your opponent with sheer activity, making them defend constantly and wearing them down until they break. Nate Diaz is the perfect example of slow twitch muscle fiber dominance in striking. His cardio is legendary, and his ability to throw volume, pressure forward, and maintain his pace deep into fights has broken elite opponents. In his first fight against Conor McGregor, Diaz weathered the early storm when McGregor was explosive and fast, and as the fight moved into the second round, McGregor's gas tank began to empty. Diaz's pace never slowed, and he ultimately finished the fight because his slow twitch endurance outlasted McGregor's fast twitch explosiveness. Max Holloway built his entire striking system around volume and pace. His ability to throw hundreds of strikes per fight without slowing down comes directly from slow twitch muscle dominance, and opponents who try to match his output eventually fade while Holloway stays fresh and dangerous into the later rounds. That's every physical advantage in striking. These attributes don't guarantee success, but they give you built-in tools that shape how you fight and what strategies work best for your body. The best strikers in the world recognize their physical strengths early and build their entire game around maximizing what they were born with.